guest is Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Detroit, part of the squad, doesn't need much of an introduction, but to give us more of an introduction and to engage in conversation with her, we have Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, who is the former chair of the Conservative. Sayeeda, are you here? Yes, you are. Fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Sayeeda, who's going to chair our discussion. Rashida Tlaib, welcome both.
Hi. Hi, everybody. And actually, fascinating conversation between Asim and Tom. It was brilliant. I was listening in to that conversation, and you've set a high benchmark for the conversation that I've Rashida, but covering hopefully some of the topics that you well. So thank you, the two of you. So I'm going to now be introducing somebody who many of you will have already heard. She's a lawyer, she's a politician, she's a campaigner. She has many firsts to her name, including becoming one of the first of 2 Muslim women elected to Congress, the first woman of Palestinian descent elected to Congress. She took her oath in her thobe, triggering a worldwide Twitter hashtag, tweet your thobe. There is no doubt that she's already impacted history, and since 2018 has, along with some of her colleagues, challenged the way that politics is done in the United States. Breaking glass ceilings and taboos and challenging the status quo, she has the scars of public office, and I hope that we'll be able to talk about some of them today. And each time they knock her down, she seems to get up even stronger. I'm delighted to welcome her to Distant Socializing at the Concordia Forum. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, Congresswoman Rashida.
Oh, assalamu alaikum, sister. Ramadan Kareem to everyone, and I hope you're all safe and well. And I love that you all did not give up as well and decided to do this virtually. I think that's really incredibly thoughtful, and also very much shows the determination in Concordia.
So it's a real pleasure to welcome you, especially personally. I've watched your career, as I'm always fascinated with fellow parliamentarians, Muslim female parliamentarians around the world. We have a really diverse audience on the call today, Rashida. So some of them are from the United States and of course follow the politics there very closely. Some from the UK and other parts of the world. So I'm going to start with some kind of questions and then if that's okay with you. I think first of all, just that moment in 2018 when you finally entered Congress, and the journey since then. Run us through what the high marks have been over the last 3 years.
I mean, I think it's been a very incredible journey, but for folks that knew me before, I was very active in Michigan politics, but also doing activism work around water, environmental justice issues, racial justice issues, especially around poverty. Detroit has some of the highest rates of poverty in the United States of America. And so been always on the front lines, but when you go to Congress, you have 434 other colleagues, and then, you know, many of which have been serving a lot longer. But right when you get there, you know, there's a sense of urgency on the part of many of us new members. I think you probably could experience a similar thing of this, like, okay, let's go fix all the broken systems. We know what's wrong. You know, a lot of my residents say it more beautifully. They said, we've been studied enough, Rashida. We already know that there's something wrong with economic injustices and what's going on in the healthcare system. So let's just get it fixed. So when you get there in the first year, I can just tell you, I'm you know, very enthusiastic about fixing all the broken systems and introducing legislation. And you know, unfortunately, though, not everyone feels the sense of urgency. There's always a sense of, well, let's wait. I'm not sure what they were waiting for. Was it this global pandemic? I'm not sure. Even the global pandemic is still getting them this sense of like waiting. I'm not sure, again, what you're waiting for when people are really suffering, and the pain of oppression is so very real in all corners of our country right now. And so has been, you know, very much feeling, you know, kind of anger and continuation of trying to find allies within my colleagues. And I have a number of them, very much sisters in service, who believe in that sense of urgency, believe that it is government's supposed to be about people and centered around people. And, but again, unfortunately, not all my colleagues feel the same way. Some have been there, again, a very, very long time and have grown very disconnected of what's actually happening on the ground.
And in terms of achievements over this period, I mean, in political terms, it's a very, very short period. You know, I can only compare it to when we entered government. I think the sense of urgency was there as well, saying we don't know how long this is going to last, and therefore we've got to make sure every day counts. What have been the days that have really counted? What do you think in the last 3 years you feel have been the real moments of achievement?
I mean, for 13 districts strong, for folks who don't know, you know, again, I have 435 members of the United States House of Representatives. I represent the third poorest in the nation. So I opened 4 neighborhood service centers throughout my district. And I want folks to understand, so even with all the brokenness, it's also the disconnection of my folks understanding where they can get services, where they can get help, again, how to make government work for them. So the 4 neighborhood service centers have been the biggest success, from, you know, people that have served our country, veterans, others getting their college debt wiped out through programs through the United States Department of Education, helping, you know, some of my clinics get access to resources, a number of folks that are disabled finally getting their application to be, you know, being pushed through versus having to wait over a year and falling into bankruptcy. So many of those, what I would call, you know, I don't know if you think of it this way, but you ever think of it, if your doctor's on the call, like your ER, you're triaging, you're kind of trying to help kind of manage this. It's kind of like that. The service centers is that kind of urgent care ER. They come in and it leads to various policies. So I was able to get my bill passed around consumer protection, pushing back against those that target retirees. These are many of our seasoned neighbors that really rely on this income, and they've become increasingly more of a target from scrupulous, you know, fraudulent schemes. So I was able to get that passed, and yes, Trump signed it. People can't believe I did not get invited during the signing, but it did get signed and become law. We also were able to pass, you know, some structural changes. You know, a lot of people do resolutions and everything, but we wanted to really change and transform people's lives immediately. And we got one of my bills passed with 220 supporters, where, you know, in the United States of America, our credit reports, and I don't know how it is in other countries, but, you know, for employer, for housing, they would look up your credit report. Your credit score is really used to access a lot of these important aspects for quality of life. And so debt stays on that credit report for 7 years. And that's a very long time. And we got it down to 4 years. And this is really, again, that would be transformative. So somebody at 18 years old, 19 years old gets debt, it stays on there until they're like, you know, 20, 26, 27 or so. A lot of that becomes a barrier through employment, housing, all those things. It kind of puts people's lives on hold. And I want folks to know a lot of this debt is medical. A majority of it is medical debt, going to the ER, not having health insurance, things like that. These are not people spending luxury items and putting on credit card and all. It's not, that's the majority of it is medical. And so we were able to pass that out of the United States House of Representatives. It's unfortunately sitting in the Senate, but it's a huge success of showing how we can change things structurally. And economists, others have said, 7 years is not even a good indicator for banks and lenders anyways. It's too long. And so getting it down to 4 years and compromising with my colleagues on that amount is important. And the most important amendment that got to the bill that I was really happy got a lot of support in Financial Services Committee is medical debt. So making sure that necessary procedures, medically necessary debt, would not get on your report for at least a year. And why this is important is because of insurance companies, surprise billing, somebody broke it. You know, we have probably the worst healthcare system in the world, I personally believe. It is really a for-profit scheme out there that is not, you know, it's not profitable to take care of sick people. They figure out other ways to do it, and it just becomes very much a broken system that allows people to die if they're too poor. And so we push back, in at least a year they can't be able to put it on their credit report, which helps families have enough time to fix it. But those are some of the biggest successes. And, you know, for a lot of other things is raising awareness on issues that have been very dear to us. comprehensive immigration reform, outworking the hate by showing policies around love and inclusion. We have really showed, and I love my district because they embrace me being Palestinian, showed that we can fight for access to water from Gaza to Detroit, and by making water a human right. Really weighing awareness and doing it in a very global and very humanitarian way of bringing communities together in that way. And it is, again, that form of oppression I continue to talk about that I think all of us want to fight against. We want to fight against dehumanization in that form. And we've been able to do it and shine light to issues that have never been discussed in Congress before.
And I think I wanted to move on to that because one of the interesting things about yourself and the rest of the squad being now there on the Hill means that you are raising issues that were considered to be taboo, issues upon which we all had a status quo and it was never challenged. How difficult has that been to challenge what has just been accepted norms? And how have you dealt with some of the kind of personal trauma that invariably comes with being in public life?
I mean, you know this. It can be increasingly frustrating, but at the same time, if you're really connected to movement work outside of the halls of Congress, you won't feel alone. So I come home every week. I fly back from Washington, D.C. right to my home, to my community, the neighborhood that raised me. And it's critically important that I get recentered and grounded of why I ran in the first place, staying connected to the people really suffering by all these broken systems so that I don't get deterred or that sense of urgency to go away. And so I continue again to stay rooted in the community I represent. And, again, I don't feel alone when I do that. There's a thing, and I don't want to, this is no disrespect to our mental health community, to folks that my neighbors who maybe suffer from mental illness, but they try to make you all feel like Congress folks make you feel like you're crazy, like something's wrong with you. Like, where are you coming from with this? When I come home, I feel sane. I feel like, no, this is right thing to do. And so every time I land in Detroit Metro Airport, I can breathe and I can say, okay, we're not broken. It's the systems and structures and how policy is made is what's broken. And that's why more children are living in poverty. The fact that the richest country in the world, we got thousands, 15 million Americans don't have access to water. They have water shutoffs during a global pandemic. The fact that people are not even getting access to testing still. I mean, there's so many things that, again, being home reminds me it is the status quo that's wrong. It's not that us coming in with these bold and aggressive and radical ideas. For so many people, that's how they dismiss us. But the fact of the matter is, the human stories out there are real. It's actually happening. And that validates and gives credibility to the work that I'm doing and many of my sisters in service are doing.
And how do you retain that? So it's interesting when you said when you get back home, you can breathe again. One of the things I talk about regularly is when I leave Parliament and I come up north, I come up on the train. We're a much smaller country, as you know, so we can get around in the train. And when I come on the train and I come home, I feel like my shoulders lift. And it's that sense of just being able, like you said, being able to breathe again and feel at ease again and feel the stress lifting as you're walking away from Parliament. But how do you make sure you never lose that? Because one of the challenges about being in frontline politics and in being in mainstream politics is that, do you feel that eventually we all become tarnished with that sense of power that comes with being in office?
God, I hope not. I really, truly hope not. I can tell you, it's funny, I without naming names, I'd meet with a colleague, my chief of staff is there, some of my other, staff members, my team members, many of them, which all came from the nonprofit sector. So they're like me, they're activists, but they're also former community organizers, social workers. So very much came from this call of action and we need change right now. I after every meeting where there's somebody you can see that they are completely numb, that they have lost touch of the reality of why it's so important to move aggressively on, climate crisis, on immigration, on healthcare, on so many things, education. And when they walk out of the room, I look at my staff and I said, if I ever get like that, we're done. And so surround yourself with people that are going to be honest with you. And I surround myself with people that are not afraid to tell me, I don't think that's a great idea. and to really, again, make, I always tell the team, you don't work for me, you don't work against me, you work with me. And we're an extension of each other. And so we want to make sure, again, we stay rooted and grounded in the community. So as much as possible. The other thing too is, and this is me just saying, look, my former colleague, the person I replaced, he retired from the United States Congress, John Conyers. He was in the United States Congress for 53 years. I will not be there for 50 years. At a point, you need to enhance and give other people, open up those doors and allowing people to come in. If it wasn't for like term limits in the Michigan legislature, I would have never been able to probably get elected. Some people before term limits were there for 20, 30 years. I say that to folks because I want other generations to be there. Even with the global pandemic, a lot of my colleagues, seasoned residents, seasoned members of Congress, majority of them are over, 60 plus, that, came from a different, came from an era, and of course they care about their districts, but their experiences are different. So what I love about the new members of Congress is the largest incoming class since Watergate, ironically, which led to an impeachment, as they all know. But that class is not just diverse, like first two Muslim women, the first youngest African-American. I think there's so many, two Native American women, first ever. There's all this beautiful diversity, but what's more diverse about us is we have student debt. We've lost a loved one because we don't have, universal health care. We have actually lived through the economic divide, the kind of low wage, a lot of us having these different positions. So it is that diversity. That's what I want in Congress, is that flow of people's lived experiences coming into play, because that is what's going to bring that sense of urgency that's needed. That's what's going to bring action. And so that's what I love about my new, I have Congresswoman from California, Katie Porter, who talks about being a single mom, but also a survivor of domestic violence. I have another colleague who lost her mother to breast cancer, and she didn't go and get access to healthcare because she didn't have healthcare, right? She didn't get preventive care because she didn't have access to healthcare because her job didn't provide it. So, there's all these, again, lived experiences that I think really are critically important, and we need to get that change up. And again, I love many of the contributions of many of my colleagues, but it does get to a point, controversial or not, but it gets to a point, you've been there too long. It is time to open space for others that need to talk about the broken systems, that can talk about it through their own personal experience.
I think some of the challenges that you talk about in terms of the challenges around climate change, poverty in developed worlds, they're challenges that all of us are facing in our own parliaments, but you uniquely have the challenge of somebody at the helm who can only be described as housing, which is the most diplomatic word that I could potentially use to. You elected a potato into the White House is probably the nicest way I could put it. How do you deal with politics when you are dealing with somebody at the top who has no sense of rationale, logic, fact, decency, humanity, and is now in the latest, I saw the latest kind of pronouncement from him about recommending we all try and inhale bleach during the COVID crisis. How do you deal with that backdrop?
Yeah, no, the incompetence is real, and it's actually leading to people dying, not even during this time, but even some of the, look, I come in, we had a federal shutdown. Our government was shut down. It's one of the first votes I had to take, is to open up government. Many of which didn't even understand why federal employees were in the food bank line to get food. I said, well, they live check by check. Again, the disconnection was very real from day one. Then we went into impeachment. The fact that the bribing of a foreign country, using, really abusing power and pushing through and ignoring the United States Constitution. Then we almost went to war with, we went to war with Iran. Like, it's one thing after the other in regards to the continuation of seeing some of the incompetence from this administration, some of the decision-making. One of the things when I talk about systems of being broken, sister, is like, people have been talking about the popular vote and the fact that we need to get to popular vote versus the electoral college. which I believe was really created during the time to really give landowners and those that are wealthy a much more power, and in the states. So there's also that, the fact that I truly believe this, and I continue to say this to people, he is not a reflection of the majority of Americans and what we believe in. And it's unfortunate that, again, the popular vote didn't win, but through the Electoral College, he was able to succeed. I also feel like, you know, this huge fear that we continue to see people becoming more numb, more allowing those actions by this president to be normalized. You know, we dismiss him as crazy, insane. Oh, he doesn't really mean that. He's not going to do that. I think it was Michael Moore, a filmmaker many folks know, very, very critical of the president, who was driving around with me through my district, and he said, sometimes I want people to think of him as being brilliant. And I was like, oh God, no. He's like, no, but if we think of him as being brilliant, maybe they will be more fearful. Maybe we be more awakened all of a sudden. Because I think it's this dismissiveness of like, it's okay, nobody's gonna listen to him. He's president of he's in the most powerful position in the world. And there's consequences to that. And to continue dismissing it. Also, you know, a lot of in this enhancing, he's such a great messenger, he's so this, he's so that. You know, even that normalizes the fact that there's an immorality there, a lawlessness. The lawlessness should just be something, again, you don't want to set this, and that's exactly what we did by not impeaching him, is we set a precedent, a very dangerous one, that is going to give the green light to future presidents to be okay with this. I mean, we have history that shows us presidents that went to war without going through Congress, and now they continue to do that, right? I mean, so it is really critically important that we don't want to underestimate the impact that someone like that has, but also recognizing, you know, how he got elected is even deeper rooted into the broken electoral system that we have here in the United States. He did not win the popular vote, but he still became president. The fact that Kentucky, one of the smaller populated, the leader in the Senate is, I mean, from Kentucky, is really setting the agenda for during this global pandemic. And that, to me, you know, again, it doesn't give me a voice. It doesn't give equal voices to everybody that lives in this country.
I want to, there's a lot of people that have joined as participants, and there's some questions that have started to come through. So I'm going to probably ask you a few more questions, and I'm going to hand it over to asking some questions from some of the participants as well. The Middle East, Palestine, of course it defines you because that's where your heritage is from. In many ways it defined my politics. I mean, my political career at the cabinet I cut short because I could no longer tolerate our policy, the United Kingdom policy, and what was happening at the time, which was the Gaza conflict. We now have this facade of this deal that's known as the deal of the century. How do you see things changing?
One of the things that has really been incredible to watch is the humanization of the continued oppression and inequality that you see in Israel right now. And the continued, you know, one of the things folks need to know is my colleagues, two of them asked me what occupation meant, because I think there's an assumption when we use these terminologies that they understand. You know, I jokingly tell all my uncles in Palestine, do not, you know, my uncles here, and what I mean, my older folks that talk politics with my colleagues, do not start with in 1948. Start with, there are children that don't have water. People can't get health care because they have checkpoints they have to go through. There's a dehumanization and inequality. You can't work anywhere you want. There's no freedom of travel. You get really to the human aspect. And that's what's changing as people are talking about the human impact of that. It's interesting because, you know, I've only known it because I've seen it myself going there as a young girl, a child. And then I also obviously have other sources of information that I gain to because, you know, my family lives there, so I'm going to seek it out. But many of my colleagues, some are nurses, some are not completely familiar with some of the policies or some of the history there or what actually is happening. They only know what they've been told to say. And literally some of them say the things they say about, for instance, BDS. many of my colleagues, when it was time to vote on it, said, well, I didn't even know what it was. I just saw so-and-so co-sponsor it, so I thought it was a good thing. I mean, this is literally the reality, that they're just supporting it because they see other people supporting it, or they're being called to ask to support it. And they think, well, if these other folks are doing it, I should be doing it. And later on, finding out, one of my colleagues who really led the effort on the anti-part, like boycotting apartheid in South Africa, was saying, oh my God, this would make exactly, it would really have reduced your freedom of speech and your First Amendment right to be able to speak up. So what I think is happening is my mere presence, some other of my colleagues are now being courageous enough to speak up. I'm publishing an op-ed with one of my colleagues about the truth about funding during this pandemic in Palestine, and how really they are being left out and left to die. And just all of that is now happening because I think, I tell people I'm more Palestinian now in Congress than I am in Palestine or in the United States. Like, I'm Rashida in Detroit. In Palestine, I'm Americanilla. I'm the American girl. And in Congress, so many of my colleagues just see me as the Palestinian. Bad or good or whatever. I'm so much, there's so much layers to who I am. But one of the things that I find is now there's these opportunities where people are asking. I love that I get asked, how's your grandmother during this time? What is happening? Or did she get accident? Did she get, does she need to get testing? All these things. I talk about her as just a regular grandmother who thinks if she drinks olive oil every day, she will never get she'll never get coronavirus or something. I'm like, Siti, that's just not how it works. But, it is just being able for folks to see us beyond how the media portrays Palestinians, what is actually happening on the ground, and really telling those stories. When my colleagues go with certain groups, they don't see everything. They only get one side. And then if some other groups that they go, alternative trips, those trips are the ones where they come back fully committed to freeing Palestine in a way of oppression and equality and all of those things. And knowing that it's the United States funding that could be used as leverage to push these ideals forward. But it's been, to me, maybe because I've just been there for quite a while, I've been asked a lot about these, and again, not judging them when they ask me what occupation means. One colleague asked me what the blockade meant in Gaza. Didn't even know. So again, there's an opportunity now where, I have an open door policy. Folks want to ask me, no judgment. I don't get angry. I just explain to them in a way that I think so many of my African-American mothers in Detroit would teach me about the civil rights movement, where they couldn't live in certain neighborhoods because of being African-American. They couldn't marry each other. Same thing. So many Israelis and Palestinians can't marry. They're literally prohibited from living in certain communities. If they do, their marriages are not recognized. There's so many ways to connect with some of the other forms of oppression that we continue to see with my Black neighbors here. But yeah, that's what I see changing a lot is the conversation around the human impact, conversation around this in a way that, I know there's a lot of professors here and I love the academic, of course that's important, but for so many of my colleagues, we really have to get to the heart and soul of what it really results in, not like how we got there as much. Because when people start sticking to that, that's when folks are asked to choose a side versus a value. And that's, I think, where we lose people.
Well, we've had one of the participants on here who saying that actually your grandmother's advice of olive oil is far better than the United States president's advice of bleach. And stick to the olive oil. We'll give her that.
I'll let her know. But no, she really thinks that keeps you healthy. And yeah, so.
I want to talk to you about sisterhood. It seems to be a big part of what you and Ilhan and a lot of others, the squad, and broader than that, are really doing in Congress. Where does that come from? Because we have a very similar sisterhood. I mean, we're probably not as fierce as the squad and as well known as the squad, but the sisterhood in Westminster is very similar, and certainly amongst women of colour, there is a sense of looking out for each other. And we have an interesting saying to say, if I disagree with you, I'll do it privately. If I agree with you, I'll do it very publicly. And that kind of is part of the rules around the sisterhood. How did that develop? And how do you see us replicating that in other parts of our life?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks, they thought that we kind of knew each other prior to getting, like, I knew Sister Ilhan Omar because she was in the legislature around the time I was getting out of the Michigan legislature. But other than that, we really didn't know each other. But I think one of the things that really brought us together was our strong opposition to further funding ICE, which is Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. So when we came in there, of course, we were hearing the stories and actually went down to the border to see that children were actually being caged, being detained, separated. I mean, literally thousands of children being separated from their family and our southern border. And so we really found just an alliance with each other where a lot of my colleagues weren't courageous enough to vote against a bill. In all four of us, Alexandria, Ilhan, and Ayana and I had ran on, abolishing ICE, not having ICE. And ICE did not exist prior to 9/11. And in many ways, it didn't really, as it was intended or whatever, it didn't actually result in anything but continued militarization of our communities and neighbors within the United States, and to continue, we believe very much that human rights violations that we continue to see from that agency. And so we came together and organically together on that. And that's when, all of a sudden people started calling us the Squad. And then we were attacked by the President of the United States at the same time to go back home, and, all of it. And that brought us together. And then we came together to have that press conference to push back on his hate rhetoric. And again, it has all been very much organic, but, off camera, offline, like, it is real. Like, we actually like each other. We hang out with each other. We know our personal stories, our lived experiences. We've cried with each other. We very much lean on each other. I feel so much less alone when I'm near them than when I'm not. But we very much align organically together because of our values and our positions on various issues. And how you can replicate that is, that sisterhood is very real already. I mean, I felt it. I feel it sometimes in my own community, my neighborhood. It doesn't have to be always labeled a squad, but I see it in organizing movement work. I see it, again, really uplifting each other through times. We quote each other. Ayana always says people closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. I love when Ilhan fights back against all the racist attacks where, I check on her and she says, Rashida, I survived war. I can survive this. Where Alex shares her story of her mother, working class, and how, they had to continue to, work twice as hard to get access to opportunities. So again, I think it's a lot of that is because we share the stories. So to really extend it out is sometimes becoming a little bit more vulnerable. And I know it's hard, and a lot of professionals on this call, but the more sometimes you're open and more vulnerable you are about why you do what you do, why you believe in what you believe in, you're going to connect with your colleagues. You're going to connect with people in a way that the bond becomes so strong, you can't rip it apart.
Yeah, it's it's inspiring to hear this, because it's there are so many, and I'm sure there are people on this conference call actually who have had similar experiences. And what we found increasingly is that in an increasingly harsh political environment, having those people to be able to rely upon are just essential, because we all have our dark moments, and we've had, as parliamentarians, as female parliamentarians, when I've had the phone picked up to me, or we've put the phone up to each other, and somebody on the phone has been in absolute tears because they've reached that point. I don't want to dwell on it, but has there been a moment, not so much in the last 3 years, but broader than that, when you've hit that moment and you've thought, I can't do this. Why am I doing this? Putting myself.
It's like at least once a week. And I only say that because I don't know if you all know, and is a little girl named Skylar, 5 years old, passed out from coronavirus. And every time I think of Skylar, I was already emotional when I read the story. Both her parents work in law enforcement, firefighter and a law enforcement officer. And, this beautiful 5-year-old little girl dies from coronavirus. And I called the grandmother, and, of course, I had the mom's number and she didn't pick up, but the grandmother answered. And I said, hi, it's Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I want to say I'm sorry. And she just broke down crying for her grandbaby. And you don't know what do you say? What do you say to them, especially like the week that we pass bills, this funding for, small business, which is so important, but it's a broken system, or where they only give you like trinkets of 100 billion for testing and to cover hospitals, and then 400 billion for the business community. It's so hard. How do we? It was so, I needed like literally an hour to just get over the emotions I was feeling of, I'd rather be out there with my bullhorn sometimes screaming on top of my lungs at the White House saying, enough, like real people are dying here. And we have to be so centered on that. And so it is hard. I mean, you do, one thing that gives me a sense of, is the younger people that email me and call me and say, like, I see myself in Congress one day. A little girl told me, oh, I can see myself running for president of the United States, because, and then I know it's because I'm there and I look, I feel, or I my rawness. Even somebody said, because I'm not your polished politician, as folks know, and I'm very, very raw and little gritty. And that kind of relates to people, but it is those folks that outreach and feel like, well, people like us do belong in Congress and people like us need to stay there. But yeah, when you talk to a mother like that, it's a grandmother, it's just, I do want to sometimes just bang my head against the wall. Like, what do you say? And what do you do? And so it is hard, and more people. I mean, we have 2,800 people that died in Michigan from coronavirus. Many of which were African Americans, and I was born and raised in this beautiful Black city in Detroit. Many of my neighbors, my neighbor down the street just lost her son to coronavirus, and it's just a lot of that pain going on. Where, I'm eldest of 14. I've been taking care of people all my life, and as a mom too, we like fixing things. We want it fixed. We are impatient. We want it fixed. So sometimes you just feel like, maybe this is not working. Maybe I need to be doing something else to get the job done.
We've had a question in, Rashida, which one of the participants has asked for. What was it like campaigning with Bernie? And where now? It might be.
I don't think people believe me when I say, I think there's like a little bit of Arab in him, by the way. Why? Because I literally have dinner with him. He did something. I'm like, oh my God, my mom would do the same thing. But it's just, he's just a really regular kind of person. And, there's a part of him that I don't know, it almost feels like family, being with family, it's kind of just like, doesn't care, like kind of, he's not, there's nothing fake about him. So it was beautiful to being around somebody that's authentic. What's incredible about Bernie, he got where he did without any corporate PAC money. And I know many folks are from corporations and come from that sector, but there is something incredibly inspiring and beautiful about the fact that he is able to raise millions of dollars, millions, throughout this campaign from just small donors. And just recently, he helped Ilhan and myself and Alexandria raise money. And within hours, he raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for us. Really inspiring, just a generation of people that haven't been engaged. They're just giving $5 or $1. There's something beautiful about it and hopeful about that. That we can outwork those that are connected, that can funnel all this money to various people that might not understand. Is the sound okay? I'm hearing it coming in and out, so I feel bad. Oh, good.
I can.
Oh. So yeah, no, I definitely have a lot of Bernie stories now, but I called him Ammo Bernie, and he totally knew what it meant. I was like, and he was very, very relatable, and always called me kid, which always made me feel younger. He's like, hey kid. And so I'm in my 40s, so it did feel good to be called a kid. Again.
Running, where now? Do you feel that you can endorse anybody else? Do you feel that you could campaign or you could get behind?
Well, one of the things today, I was interviewed by MSNBC, news channel, and they asked a similar question. I'm an issue campaigner. I run on issues. And I know that if I run on specific issues, if it's Medicare for all, if it's the $15 minimum wage increases, all those things, that I know Biden is not embraced yet. But if I get over there and I embrace a candidate versus these movement, issues that move people, I think we'll lose people. So, Michigan went to Trump for the first time since the early 1980s, I believe. We did not become a red state until this, we lost, and he won Michigan by 10,000 votes. I say this to you all because, about 90,000 people came out to vote out of millions, about 4 million or so in 2016. But 90,000 of them, about 89 or so thousand, got in line, voted for the bottom of the ticket, but left the top blank. They didn't vote for the third party, for Secretary Clinton, or for Donald Trump. They didn't vote for any of us. They skipped the top of the ticket because they didn't feel like they had a choice. I'm going to try to work really hard to do turnout, but making people understand their vote is not for somebody, but really it's against what we have now, which is the status of Trump. And I think that will motivate people to come out and vote a lot more than trying to tell people this is going to be, we got to go here. Because I don't want them to feel like, in many ways myself, feel like I'm giving up on Medicare for all. I'm giving up on some of these other issues that are critically important to my district. I want them to know not getting out to vote means another 4 years with Donald Trump. And that would be much more devastating than the alternative.
So one of the things that we talk about a lot, and it's something I presume all of us who've come from a campaigning or a community organizing background have, how do you move from protest to participatory kind of politics? How do you move from having the megaphone outside the White House to trying to get it sit inside the White House? And I think, with all of us, it never leaves us. I mean, I actually went on a demonstration after years of having done formal politics. Last year, it was the demonstration against Trump. It finally moved me to get back out on the streets. But what advice would you give? Because it's one of the challenges that I see, and you must see, Rashida, when I see some really young, bright activists coming through, and I'm worried that they're going to be burned before they can actually, the way in which they protest or the way in which they conduct themselves, whilst based on, comes from a good place, but invariably sometimes destroy them before they actually make a difference. What's your advice?
I mean, look, whatever the experience that they, for me, it's that expression. I know for a fact that in my district, I have local artists that used to do something else, and now they're doing more social justice artwork. People doing spoken word. It's their form of expression and freedom of speech. I'm the person, I need a bullhorn, and I need to be out there protesting and getting all that energy out to say, see, I'm not alone. I'm with all these people that believe in the same social justice issue together. So sometimes that power to convene, that power to bring that voice and raise it is incredibly important. And you mean, I saw this during the labor rights movement. It was very much birthed here in Detroit, where that's how workers were able to organize and come together, is when they collectively raise their voices that way. I have not got rid of that activism. I even had some of my supporters, many of which are on this call, calling me saying, why are you still getting arrested? Why are you doing this? You shouldn't be out in the streets. And I was like, if my neighbors are getting arrested because they're fighting for a $15 minimum wage, I'm going to be alongside of them. And it's real for me. And I only go because I'm a lawyer too. So the last time I did this, I was able to actually make sure people's rights were read, that nobody was used. I'm such a mama bear, want to take care of people. And I knew I was going to be okay. I needed to make sure the workers were going to be okay as well. The squad talks about this, by the way, because a lot of us are out there constantly. And the way people try to discredit us is like, oh, they're just activists. We're proud. Yeah, we are. And guess what? We're now part of the United States Congress. We're an extension of a lot of this movement, folks. Like, I know what's going to happen, what's going on. Sometimes I'm like, you guys organize a protest. if you want to protest against me, do it. It gives me credibility to say I need to do this because people outside on the Capitol lawn are saying that I need to be able to fight for them and get this done. So, you know, even I did a lot more than I used to as a young person, but I think it shapes, you know, a lot of folks, folks on this call, they may do op-eds. They may do more research in certain areas. There are those, though, that I want to say that are like me. I don't judge those that will never, ever go out on the streets protesting or with signs. That's the one thing that I tell movement folks, do not ever judge somebody because that's just not in them to do that. Maybe they're the ones who write a letter to the editor. Maybe they're the ones who make the 10 calls to the various members of Congress. Maybe they're the ones who, you know, engage and make sure that all their members of their family actually goes out and votes. So there's different forms of this kind of civic engagement. But I think the more we try to, don't just judge people for doing certain things. I mean, people judge me after, when he was campaigning, when President Trump was campaigning, you know, it was 12 women and I that went in and interrupted his speech at this economic club gathering a mile away from where I lived. And, you know, nobody even noticed the video before, but, you know, after I became a member of Congress, the video went viral, like, oh my God, isn't that the woman who got kicked out of, and people afterwards were like, is that former state representative Rashida, why is she protesting it? And I felt like, well, that's the most American thing I could have done. This is a man trying to promote something that I feel like is unconstitutional. So I yelled at him, have you ever read the Constitution? You should read the Constitution. And every single other woman asked other things, labor issues, whatever it was. But even my mother, who would never do that. Does she love her? Absolutely. Does she want change? Absolutely. But, you know, she called me, she said, what did you do that for? And I was like, Mom, it's the most important thing I could have done at that moment is demand that he answers these questions. And of course, you know, as a typical immigrant parent, she hangs up on me. But I mean, the point is, we may not align, but I think our hearts are in line in saying that something has to be done. But some of us don't feel like it's silence. Some people don't feel like it needs to be done a certain way. So I wouldn't judge people based on the approach that they want to take. You know, I say this a lot. Dr. Martin Luther King needed Malcolm X, and Malcolm X needed Dr. Martin Luther King. And I say that because they all had different styles. But boy, sometimes they were able to maneuver that to give other person a seat at the table.
But what advice would you be giving to young people? Because one of the concerns that we have certainly amongst young Black, Asian, minority ethnic activists, or even young Muslim activists, is that they may express their campaign in a way which effectively writes them off for high office forever. How do you protect young activists from that? I mean, you and I were, you're a little younger than me. You said you're in your 40s. One of the participants has said, it's the best time of your life is in your 40s. I call it fighting injustice and menopause simultaneously. So you'll have another campaign to fight soon. But I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is that we grew up in an era where every part of our life was not on social networks. We didn't put all our campaigns out in a way which left a permanent footprint for people to go back and haul over the coals. I mean, I'm sure we've all got photos at protests which we all dread coming out at some point. But actually, we were fairly protected in our early campaigning days. The young now are not. So what advice would you give them in terms of how to make sure that they have a longevity in their political lives and their activism?
Well, I worry so the question in itself, I worry about primarily because I don't want people to function from a place of fear. Well, think about Senator Sanders. If he was thinking, oh my God, that picture is going to go viral of me getting arrested to fight for, you know, even at that time, even though it was very unpopular for him to do it, luckily there wasn't Twitter for people to come attack him, find out where he lives, all this other stuff. But I don't want our young people, I want to recognize they have every right to be angry. That's one thing. People are like, why are they so angry? Like, their anger needs to be acknowledged as their truth. They're angry because they feel very much othered, very much dehumanized. All of that is coming in fruition. Decisions being made should be based on their principles and their values, however they want to express it. But it shouldn't come from a place of fear of like, oh my God, is this going to come back and haunt me later? I want them to think of it as, is this something later on that I'm going to go back and say, well, that was the right thing to do? I mean, I see people to this day, you know, even some said, oh, I voted for this before, but I changed my mind. That's okay. I see it a lot on gun reform. I used to believe that, but now it's out of control. So I've changed my position, and that's okay. But I don't want folks to, of course, you always want to be careful in anything being, you know, misinterpreted of what your intentions are. Sometimes you can't control that, but don't function from a place of fear, though, that somehow it's going to haunt you. I know, like, people went back. This particular journalist, I used to write for my local college newspaper, went back and pulled all of my articles, all on Palestine, articles that would get published, and went through it. And he was interviewing me, and I said, oh, you found them? I can't find them online. He went to the library and pulled them up, the archives, so you can read through them. And I said, well, what is it? He goes, well, everything you say now, you said then. You compared the Black movement in the United States to what's happening in Palestine. Like, everything I'm saying now is coincide. So I just hope whatever you're doing is from a principle and from your position, what you believe in now. And I think you'll be okay, because you can always defend it later.
You're carrying some amazing messages in, Rashida. I just want to read some of them to you. My thoughts too: get angry, get active. Somebody saying much respect for your courage and efforts from Germany. I just want to say free Palestine all the way from Sydney, Australia. It's 3:45 a.m. and somebody's listening into this. I think it's a she. She ends that with saying, a badass Palestinian, alhamdulillah. I don't know whether I could use that kind of language in alhamdulillah in the same phrase in the month of Ramadan. I'll have to do an extra nafil or something at the end of this. How's Ramadan going, Rashida?
It's okay. I mean, it's good. I mean, we're home. It's trying to keep my mother busy. I FaceTime her every day, ask her what she's cooking. You know, she wants to cook for us. So, you know, we're coming up with a plan that, you know, if somebody makes a dish or whatever, we leave it on each other's porches. We're just worried about my mom. She has a lot of pre-existing conditions. You know, we've taken the car away. We're really worried, but she's my biggest, you know, the person that I know. And, you know, this is where she gets to see all of us all the time throughout the whole month, and she doesn't get that chance. So we're trying to figure out a way. The woman can FaceTime now like nobody else. So that's a good thing. So she knows how to use the iPad now, and she's FaceTiming. But even yesterday, I'm a big fan of her Rosen Halib. I don't know, Palestinians know, but it's basically like a rice pudding. I was like craving, as you know, when Ramadan, we crave stuff. So my mom was telling me through FaceTime how to make it. And she's like, let me see. And so I was like taking the thing and showing her, and she goes, put a little bit more milk. And so I'm in some ways, you know, trying to, you know, live in this new, you know, kind of culture and world we're in right now during Ramadan. It's been difficult mostly for my mama, but I'm working on that. We're trying to figure out a way that we share foods, that we are, you know, talking to each other throughout the day, even thinking of ways to do iftar like together through FaceTime and things like that. So we're trying to get there. It's harder for me because I've actually had to go to DC and come back. So I have to self-quarantine myself for another 14 days before I'm okay to see my mom. So there's a lot of that. And I know my brother, you know, I'm the eldest of 14. So a handful of us are still working outside of the home. So there's a lot of that. And so it's a lot of protection of my mom. But it's good. I mean, my city is doing good in Palestine. They did lose internet yesterday. My mom calls them every day. They're doing okay. It's like they are getting, which is nice, food deliveries, things like that are coming into the West Bank finally.
I'm going to read a few more of these messages out because we're coming to the end of our conversation. That rice pudding is traditionally awesome and yummy, says somebody. It says, it's been a joy listening to Rashida today, active, honest and relatable. Telling real stories about the vulnerable is so important. And then somebody's put, oh my God, Halib, I'm now craving baklava with ice cream. And I've still got hours to go before my fast opens. Somebody else has said, may Allah protect our moms. My mom was diagnosed with coronavirus a few weeks ago. She's also fully recovered, alhamdulillah. That's good to hear. And somebody else has said here that Kashmir is one of the issues that they'd like you to speak on as well. Expand your system, they've said to that.
Yeah, no, and it organically has happened. I don't know. So what happened was me becoming very active on the Kashmir issue was this letter was being circulated for my colleagues to sign, which, you know, wasn't a bad letter, except there was this lie in there about the blockade being uplifted and that people can talk. So I now have what I call working group of Kashmiris with that have, you know, I know of a couple that just literally had left Kashmir right before the blockade, before all the you know, unbelievable, horrific actions by the Indian government. And so I had them in the room. I had Indian Christians, Hindus, you name it. So we created a coalition that created the resolution that you saw. It's the most aggressive resolution you'll see, talking about self-determination, really getting the roots of the United Nations, the report by the United Nations, uplifting that a little bit. And all of my responses have been footnoted, everything intentionally, because what I see my colleagues falling into is some of this rhetoric that is not actually truthful, and pushing back on that with plain language, but footnoting, these are where I'm getting my sources from. These are valid, credible sources that are saying that children are being shot with pellet guns, blinding them. And then actually having a doctor, a son of a doctor that is in a hospital right now, literally trying to prevent blindness of children. And then really getting into the weeds people don't want to talk about is the rapes of men and women in Kashmir. So really getting, again, to the, what I do in Palestine is to put a human face to it, is trying to put a human face to Kashmir. And again, Kashmir has the same thing, a lot of really deep history there, that if we get too much into it, it becomes about Pakistan and India, not about Kashmir people. Like, it needs to be about Kashmiris. And we need to focus it on about Kashmiris, not about all these other things. So I know there's a resolution that Congresswoman Jayapal is pushing forward. I'm not a co-sponsor yet. I just want you to know I personally am not on there specifically because I want people to ask me why I'm not on there. And when they do, I tell them it's because self-determination is not in the resolution. It is, I know it's a tougher fight, but I feel like we need to continue to uplift that issue. That is the core issue of why right now the Kashmiri people are at the beckon and, like, literally going to continue to die if we don't get to the core structural problem there of them having the right to self-determine. And so that is what's, really at the forefront. And again, this coalition, I'm so proud of. What is beautiful about them is there's a, current state representative and others that have, followed the Modi, like, I don't know what I call it. I don't want to reduce it to brainwashing, but like the racism, the hate, it's real. And so, people I've getting a lot of like folks coming after me and disagreeing with me and think this is a Muslim, and no, it's a humanity issue. This is a human rights issue. I mean, folks are literally being targeted solely because of who they are. Because of the rhetoric that we're all dealing with Trump, and is so much in line with this like nationalistic, just completely, toxic approach. And the more people want to like stay silent on it or look away, I had a doctor call me out of the blue that works with my cousin recently and say, "Hey, you don't understand the history." I said, "That's what they always say about Palestine." You know what I do know, doctor? Children are being blinded. Women are being raped by Indian government, folk like the military. That's not true? Okay. Well, the United Nations disagrees, right? So I can tell you that has been something that, all of you need to continue to uplift and really share the truth about what's happening there. And a lot of information is still, I think, unknown, because I think the blockade has really been a detriment. It was intentional, again, to continue not to allow people to have the truth about what's happening there.
We have come to the end of our hour, Rashida. I mean, I could talk to you all evening, and nobody in the house is going to get an iftar if I do, because I have to now go off and start to do the other side of my job. But there's so many wonderful, inspiring conversations. Thank you. The kind of comments that are coming in, you've really inspired a whole load of people who are on this call today, but you've also and continue to inspire a whole load of people across the world. Your sister parliamentarians like me and many others have watched you and Ilhan and the others as their careers have progressed, and you give us hope, and it's great to see that there are campaigners like you across the world who are fighting in some very, very dark places on some very, very important issues. So stay safe, have a fantastic Ramadan, carry on the amazing person that you are, and inshallah, just the last few words, and then we're going to say goodbye.
No, just thank you all so much. It's great being among my chosen family in so many ways. I do want to share just the last quote, and some of you have heard me talk about this, but an African-American Black pastor in my district, African-American pastor in my district, of Baptist background, he looked at me when I was at his church visiting, and he looked right at me and he said something that I continue to share with people. He said, our country is not divided. We're just disconnected. And I share this with you all because during this Ramadan, if there's any way to expose our faith for all those that are Muslim on the call, and even if you're not, this is so critically important, is through service of others, showing up for others. And so please, this Ramadan, let's do that connection that I think is so needed. I know that it makes a huge difference on all the issues that we work on that we care about, but let's do a lot of connection. Let's expose our faith in a profound way through service of others, in a genuine, authentic way. But I know Michigan Muslims, we do really, I'm not bragging, but we really do a really great job. Like I have volunteers and Muslims right now delivering groceries in predominantly Black communities and predominantly other like communities that again, may not share our same faith, but we're showing our humanity coming through on that in so many ways. But again, we're very humble about it. We try not to, because we've taught in our faith to be constantly humble, right? But at this time, I want you to just sometimes brag, just talk about it, please. I need you to, for the future of my boys and others, to show the true sense of who we are as Muslims. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
I'm going to hand over to take us to the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.